Hey everybody, welcome back to the latest episode of AI Unleashed. And today we're going to talk about potentially something slightly different, and that is the impact of AI on work. We're going to move away a little bit from talking about people and talking about machines differently, and just how do we merge all of this stuff together in something that's coherent and something that adds value to the organization, the individual, society, government, the trajectory of humanity more broadly. So let's get our thinking caps on. And today I am joined by a good friend of mine, Tejal Shah. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ash. Great to be here.
So before we go into the meat of the discussion, Tejal, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Tejal Shah. I headed up talent at Kantar and I've just left and looking for a new role. Been really involved in AI adoption through my time at Kantar. And more broadly, a little bit about me is I have a very squiggly career. So I'm a chartered accountant by training. I've had commercial roles, I've had transformation roles, I've had talent roles, and I've got AI experience. So what I bring is a lot more kind of a rounded, commercial, more strategic way of thinking about talent transformation. And really what I'm passionate about is driving sustainable transformation that is very people-centered. And I'm really excited by being here today. So thank you very much for the invite, for what I hope is an interesting discussion.
Yeah, it's going to be amazing. Let's do it. Right. So, start off with, I get on stage quite a lot. And one of the things I sometimes say is, there are multiple different types of AI in the market. And it's not about models and LLMs and all of this stuff, but we have the use of the word AI can be different. So, some providers, suppliers will talk about AI as a marketing term. It doesn't mean anything. It's just now we have a new AI product, an AI powered teacup or whatever it is. Then we have the technology itself, the things that are being pushed out by big tech firms that we can all use, and we call those things AI. And then the third one is companies that are looking to offshore, to downsize, to do something slightly different with their workforce, with their headcount. They might use the term AI just to have a kind of scapegoat or a panacea around something that is fundamentally an organizational restructure. So we've got these different ways of thinking about the term AI and how we use it. And when we spoke before, we were talking about the balance between using AI for things and using offshoring and using homegrown talent and all of these things. So let's just start the journey there, start the conversation there. How have things changed in the talent restructuring, offshoring space over the last year or couple of years?
Yeah. Offshoring has become really popular, I'd say, over the last kind of 5 to 15 years. And I've been involved in offshoring teams into India, Kuala Lumpur, Warsaw, the Philippines. And if I think back to kind of why we were doing it, it was primarily for cost arbitrage. But I think with AI, the cost equation has changed. It is inordinately hard work and painful to actually offshore teams, more than people ever take into account when they're putting their ROI case in place. And the reality is the cost saving is narrowing. So partly it's more expensive to offshore in terms of, the actual people cost, because that cost arbitrage is narrowed, but also your compliance approvals, all the things you need to get in place to make that happen. The attrition in some of these offshore hubs is really high. People are really fickle in moving to new jobs for not very much money difference at all. And actually, it's a big investment in your culture. These offshore hubs are in an office type cultures. So they need big offices, lots of infrastructure, all of that. So I think the cost equation is changing. And actually what AI does is bring a different kind of capability arbitrage. And so it's forcing leaders to rethink that value creation piece. And normally the kind of work that's offshored is work that is high volume, repeatable. It gives you good consistency. AI is actually great at doing that. And even work with the more kind of data analytics type of stuff is probably going to be better performed by AI. So at Kantar, for example, we saw that firsthand. Large amounts of data from market research, including verbatim comments, would come in. They would typically go to an offshore center in Chennai, it would take an analyst a week to analyze the data, find the trends, find the insights, summarize into a lovely PowerPoint, provide the recommendations. It would go back to an onshore team. That is done in minutes now using AI. And when we looked at the A/B testing, testing for quality, for bias, actually the AI work was more superior. So I think, if you are an organization that haven't offshored yet, I'd be thinking about AI and agentic AI instead. There's a higher upfront investment, but a lot more scalable thereafter.
It's interesting because I was reflecting on the times that I've offshored in outsourced or offshored, like in various roles that I've had. And there are a couple of different aspects to what you just said. So the first one is, of course, the data mining itself. Where do we get our research from? And if you already had that, that's a step that you've done yourself. The second thing is understanding that data. And understanding that data is either you're offshoring for cost or you're offshoring for capability. So there's something that I want to do. I don't have the capability, so I'm going to find somebody who does that. And that could be outsourced or offshoring or partnership, or, it could be a talent play or anything like that. And the AI landscape allows us to do this cheaply, effectively, in comparison to finding an agency. The other part is context. So whenever I've worked with companies before, and I have worked with clients who are looking at agency work, so they have an agency, they spend X million a year on agencies, and they want to reduce that with the use of AI, the use of workflows, etc. Now, one of the things that strikes me about that is sometimes there is a procedural difficulty. So a big company will say, I can't, in my internal landscape, I can't go through the due diligence or the selection or even the awareness of different technologies when I want to use 5, 6, 7 different things at once. So I'll go to an agency that has all of these things, and then we can just tell them what to do. And they will go and make whatever it is that we want to make, usually content generation, with all of these different tools. So it becomes effectively a mechanism for getting around your own internal IT due diligence. So you move the risk of that due diligence to an agency. And it requires the agencies to have context, because whenever I have worked with these kinds of agencies in the past, I'm talking about the e-learning development style agencies, here you go. You're going to go make 100 different bits of e-learning every year, and we're just going to give you some information and you go off and do it. The cost base per item is lower. On paper, the cost base per item, actual cost base, is way higher because you have to have internal teams that manage the agency, that explain the context, that are available back and forth for questions. And soon you're effectively directing what happens. And what you're saying is, can we have the internal team using a bunch of AI agents or AI systems or workflows or point solutions that will do this thing in a way that doesn't require all of that headache of managing an agency? It's an interesting balance, because I don't know about you, but are you actually seeing companies moving to agencies, external agencies, with a bit more thought? They're not just pulling the trigger and making it happen, but they're thinking it through. Is that happening?
I think so. For all of the reasons you said. The time it takes to build that context and translate that into capability and therefore deliverables is harder. If I think about one example, at Kantar, we have our chief AI scientist, and he's based out in India. He's built a team around him. And if I think about that team, they apply a lot of judgment, they create a lot of value, but the way they do that is that they've moved up the curve in terms of judgment. And that's because they've got real senior people in market already. They've got exposure to kind of quite exciting work where actually they do need to know the context. They do need to influence people. They're co-creating in the design. There is quite a lot of psychological safety and trust between his team, for example, and the rest of the organization, in a way that, that power dynamic is much more balanced, because I think in that sort of agency model you're describing, it can be an us and them type of situation. Whereas, in this situation, they're much more equal and balanced, and that judgment is being exercised. And I think the incentives matter. They're what they are being assessed on is kind of judgment-based KPIs. It's kind of consulting type advice. It's building product that's going to go directly to the client. They've got decision rights on, how they build it and things like that. They are accountable to committees at the executive team level. That's very different. And so in a roundabout way to answer your question, I think organizations are becoming really a lot more thoughtful around whether to outsource to, a consulting type business, to think about all of those factors and whether they're really going to get value for money in terms of the context and the input they need to put in, and whether it's set up right.
Do you think, tricky question, right? Do you think clients who have, I'll give a context, I'll get a little bit of context for this, and that is that I generally think that it is difficult to change capabilities. So in the L&D space, you might say an instructional designer is somebody who's basically summarizes information and makes some graphics. And they're going to now shift to be an agent curator or curating the data for agents, or they're going to be a performance consultant. Whenever I hear that kind of terminology, I think the shift is too big, right? The upskilling requirements is too big. It's better off to just get a different person who's already experienced in that thing. And so I give that context around this concept of consulting. So we have clients who have previously been outsourcing to low-cost, volume-based agencies. Now we're saying it'll be better if you had a consultative approach where there's more freedom to make decisions and give high-quality output. Now, this is true whether we're talking about people or we're talking about AI systems. Having something that can produce high context, high quality outputs is going to be beneficial. Do you think that the clients, and it's not necessarily the organizations, but the people, the same people who were previously only selected for low quality, high volume, low cost, are capable of scrutinizing something that is in front of them that should be a high context, high judgment partnership?
I think it's the trickiest of questions. And if I'm honest, I think the answer is sometimes. And when I think about sort of the balance of probability here, on one hand, if you're on the ground, you've got this wonderful opportunity to move yourself up the value curve that I talked about with the aid of some tools. But in order to do that, it requires someone to have quite a lot of agency to really understand the business, understand the context, think about how they could add value more than what they are doing. Needs a great manager to kind of help guide them and nurture them and encourage them down that path. And a lot of, curiosity to actually learn new things. Some of it will be technical, but some of it will just be exercising that brain of theirs in a completely different way. So I think that's the most optimistic part of this. And I saw this within my own team, for example. There were some super bright sparks. I mean, one in particular was like the most junior in the team. And, she was just thinking in a different way compared to others, and therefore was able to add value in a different way than she was before. I think for the majority, I think it's quite tough. And I think there's a couple of factors within that. This will particularly affect more junior members of your workforce. If they haven't been in work for that long, how have they had the opportunity to build up the context and understanding of what the business does? If they are remote working most of the time, I think it's even harder because they're not there, absorbing all of that context on a day-to-day basis. So they are one step removed, sometimes two steps removed from really understanding that business context. I think, if I think about younger generations coming into the workplace, sometimes, if I'm being honest, they're not as articulate. They're not as confident to build those relationships, to ask really good questions, to really aid their understanding from a business context. So how do we help them, And I think organizations that are helping to reskill have to be thinking about some of those base layer skills around, helping people build context and understanding of the business as a starting point. And then I think it's difficult. They need experiences to really exercise that judgment. I don't think they're gonna do that doing the same old work that they've been doing, from their home. So I think it's tricky. I think the answer is sometimes not, and I'm not overly optimistic unless individuals themselves have got that agency and motivation, and the organization, their managers, are going to really help encourage and translate what AI means to them in a much more practical way.
I don't know if I agree with this. And the reason that while you were talking, I was thinking that many of the organizations that I've worked with are still very nascent in their AI journey. So they don't have necessarily a lot of context, a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience with some of the things that might be emerging technologies. And I want somebody who's smart and can pick things up and figure out whether or not something just passes the basic kind of sniff test of, does something make sense? Versus somebody who's going to build a relationship with a bunch of people who, frankly, in most organizations, normal distribution of workforce populations, do I really want somebody to be coming into an organization and building relationships and getting context with and from people who, frankly, don't know what they should be doing, are the people who are most at risk from the AI revolution because they haven't added value for maybe 15 or 20 years in some cases. So I'm kind of undecided as to whether or not I really want the best and the brightest of the new generation to be mixing with people who really shouldn't be working at the moment. What do you think?
I think it's tough. With my own example, I'm a chartered accountant by training, and I was dropped into an investor relations team. I wasn't experienced. I didn't know. And if I think about some of the skills I built up, a lot of that was, yes, being smart and curious, but I built those relationships and learned on the job and, asked some questions to really build that knowledge. But I was, doing it in a way that helped me broaden out my skill set. And I think the challenge that you're posing is that possible? And even if it is, the people that they're asking might not be there in the workforce going forward. So what happens there? And I think it's really difficult. Maybe this is a matter of time because and we'll talk later on, I'm sure. My view is I think there are swathes of roles that will disappear, or the kind of work that will disappear and change. And so the nature of your workforce will change. But I think the pace of that depends on how smart organizations are in the way that they embrace this revolution. I think I do worry for those younger generations because I think, one thing for sure is if you've got an AI native junior person and they are bright, I think they will get absorbed into the company, into a role, because they will be able to add value very fast. I think there's a whole load of other people who ordinarily would have learned by doing, by the experience in a role. And I think those roles either aren't going to be there, or the people who they would learn from won't be thinking in the right way for them to really build their skills and experience as they go along. So I do think there's a crisis coming. And I don't think the education system is thinking dynamically enough to start catering for that.
The education system is, whether it's schools or universities, is separate from the idea of having a generation which is AI native, because the implication there is, of course, they have access to and are using the technology in their day-to-day life and day-to-day ways. So we are talking around various topics that are, I guess we could plot this on a 3x3 matrix. So we've got kind of cost, scalability, and quality. And we've also got individual, organizational, and to some degree societal or regulatory on the other axis. And if we think about those, we have very different dynamics in each box in that 3x3. And the reason I'm laying this out is nearly every time I have a panel discussion, a conference speech, a podcast, we talk in ways that are micro and macro across all of these different dimensions. And it's quite easy to bleed from individuals in an organization and what should we do as a society. I'm kind of a firm believer that organizations in a capitalist model exist to generate revenue, to generate value for the organization, for shareholders. And that's the interest of businesses. And society tends to have a slightly different set of interests. that government should be dealing with. And government kind of needs to be the linchpin between all of these things because revenue and economies kind of grow together. So when we think about these things, we have this dynamic. What should we be doing as a society, the education system, how people are skilled, what the opportunities for jobs are, etc., and what an organization should do if they are trying to manage this stuff for themselves. My view on organizations is that they need to restructure for a hybrid workforce, which includes machine capability and human capability. And that
Absolutely.
means that, not everybody who currently works will be there in the future. But organizations aren't really pulling the trigger at the moment because of societal reasons. They don't want to necessarily be the bad guy. Big tech companies don't care about this, and they're all just laying off everybody. Every other day we see an announcement. So there's a dynamic between AI systems and productivity and society. So how are you seeing this play out? And we could talk about AI and productivity, or we could talk about AI and society. They're all kind of linked. So let's start with the productivity piece. How are you seeing that play out in organizations?
I think there is a lot of hype, a lot of noise, a lot of activity around AI adoption in organizations at the moment. Everyone is trying to build what I call that horizontal AI literacy skills in their organizations, right? And myself and my team were very involved in that at Kantar, such that Kantar became Microsoft's top third Copilot adopter, which on paper sounds great. And, there was a lot of great work to do that. And you could see that at an individual level, people were saving, up to 10 hours a week. That is great. So yes, people, as they move up the curve in terms of their knowledge and comfort levels with AI, will become more productive because they're tools, right? And they're using tools to improve the way they do their work. But when you look at an enterprise-wide level, if you add together all of the pilots, the individual productivity plays, the hackathons, all of these change management campaigns, they do not necessarily equate to productivity at an enterprise level that you can measure through the P&L. What I see is that if you are looking at work and you've identified a challenge or a problem or a pain point, and then you are thinking about how to reimagine that work where AI could be a tool that helps you be more efficient, then great. Then I think you've got opportunities to drive that productivity through your workforce. But the key thing on that is you need to understand as an organization where those pain points are in your organization in terms of how work gets done, but what's underpinning that work. Because I think the reality of work at the moment is, it is, there is a myriad of complex decision-making hierarchies. The data's super fragmented. There's a whole load of tacit knowledge sitting with people in terms of how you get things done, who you need to contact to get things done. And if you are trying to apply AI on top of that, you are applying it on broken processes, and that is not going to equate to productivity, right? So I think there's real value in thinking through what is it you're trying to solve? How do you understand the work? And then you can go through to understand whether AI can automate that work, can augment the work. So with a human, judgment is critical. Humans are needed because there's a relationship aspect to this. And then when you've redesigned that work, that's when you can think about what impact does that have on your productivity, your workforces, the tooling, etc.
So the impact on productivity, because you're going down a road which I'm very comfortable with, which is the concept of reproducible systems. So workflows, automations, these kinds of things. In that space, you have a fork in the road. And the fork in the road is, you mentioned that AI is a tool. And that's not something I generally agree with in both of these forks. I think in one fork, absolutely. It's a thing that human beings use to enhance productivity. In the other fork in the road, we have automations, workflows, and we have the concept of agents. Now, I think when we look at that side of things, I think it's slightly unfair to call it AI a tool, because the implication is a human being would use a tool to accomplish a task. It's not necessarily the case when we have autonomous systems, because the identification of a task, decision-making within a task structure completion or non-completion of a task, checking of a task, all of these things would be done by a system with no human intervention. So we have that separacy between these kinds of
But I
concepts.
suppose on your second fork, I think agents will be making decisions, etc. But where's the accountability? So I think you can have, a master agent that's orchestrating, but I think you also need, in my mind, a human who's accountable in some shape or form. And I think the skill set they need is quite different, because I think there is an awful lot of judgment to really understand what's going on and, make some judgment calls around, is the data good? Is the outcome good, bad, or ugly? How did that decision get made? Is there bias? Is there not? I think there's a whole load of accountability. If something goes wrong, is it the machine to blame or a human? I'd say actually you need a human in the loop to own this and orchestrate. And I do think that's a different skill set.
So this is ultimately a variation of the trolley problem. And in that space, when we say we need humans to be somehow accountable or have oversight or have some kind of capability to oversee a machine, I fully agree that this is a completely different skill set. This skill set currently in most organizations is going to nature of capitalism, nature of organizations. It's going to be fulfilled by somebody who already is within the organizational structure, maybe not somebody who's recruited, but somebody who exists within that organizational structure, and maybe or maybe not get some additional training or some additional support or has some additional ways of finding out information and upskilling themselves. In that example, and I'm being deliberately, what's the word, pessimistic, I guess, because my belief in people and systems isn't what it used to be when I was a younger guy. So in this space, I mean, I've seen this play out so many times. You go, here you go. This guy, he used to play golf with the CEO. Why don't we make him the human overseer of our AI systems? Why? Because he's a good lad. When we go to the pub, we have a good laugh with him. He doesn't need any special skills, but his current job isn't going to exist. We want to do right by this guy. Here you go. You oversee the systems. That's a potential situation that organizations might find themselves in. How might an organization start to address the obvious shortfall in human oversight of AI systems in that kind of scenario?
I think they need to get sharper around their assessment criteria on talent being appointed into that role. If I'm being really honest, I think that type of executive has a sunset career, right? I think what organizations who are smart will probably be thinking about this now, and those who aren't quite there will probably have some kind of big failure or issue or something where they will have a whole load of lessons that they will learn, will get much sharper around the kind of skills you need in that kind of person. And I think the understanding the organizational context, the business, the clients, I think that's really important. Sometimes an existing person is going to have that skill set stronger than someone coming in and learning it. I think the critical thinking, that systems thinking that you need in a much more structured way, I think that's tougher to find in some, pre-existing, legacy management. And I think that's the bit that I think organizations really need to tune up. I do think the other softer parts around the kind of culture that they instill, the psychological safety, where there's humans, still in organizations, you're going to want to need to curate this culture where people are experimenting, they are clear on that organizational North Star and how that could translate to their role. But I think there's this sort of coaching piece around people trying new things, but leaders needing to be very thoughtful around working through what went well, what didn't go so well, what did we learn, what are we going to do differently, and holding people to account on that side of things. So I think that part will also be important, but it needs to be in the context of a very kind of systems thinker who's much more structured in thinking through that real possibility of where AI could really take a company to another level and breaking it down into something that's manageable and absorbable by the company.
I mean, that takes us down the road of hybrid workforces, team composition, organizational redesign, because this thing I think is going to be crucial for the next year, 2026, as organizations start to put in systems. Let's just generally call them systems that have an impact on what people do. We're going to need a different makeup of people. We're going to need a different headcount, a different department structure, whatever that looks like for an organization. We're going to need that to be somehow complementary in terms of the hierarchies that humans fulfill and the hierarchies of work breakdown that a machine does. So if we think about those couple of things, we have the obvious impact on jobs. Giving a speech about this tomorrow. Time of this recording is undisclosed. I'm not going to say it, but I'm giving a speech about this tomorrow. And that is, roles that are disappearing, roles that are appearing, how we might approach that kind of restructuring or redesign when we think about the AI revolution, multi-agent frameworks, human hierarchies, forming a hybrid solution together. And this is all exciting stuff. But it does, as we said at the start, it mean that we have to address the elephants in the room. And the elephant in the room for me is that for the last couple of years, let's say thought leaders on LinkedIn have been saying, AI is not going to take your job. It's going to augment you. It's going to free up your time for critical thinking and problem solving and all of these things. People just aren't that good at this stuff. So we have all of these competing things in the context also of some roles are just not necessary anymore. In the learning and talent space, we have anybody who's making content manually going back and forth with any type of technology, including a GPT or a Copilot. Your role is not required. The thing that you do for a living is just not necessary. Anybody can go and do this right now. These are the things that L&D, talent, HR people are going to be grappling with, just like marketing and sales people are going to be grappling with this stuff. So if we think about the future of organizational design and AI, everybody's got their kind of view on what this should be. For me, in my company, it's mostly maybe 95% machines and, 5 to 10% maybe human vision, direction, expertise, oversight, these kinds of things. But big populations of workers can't do this because they're not all top performers. So where do you land on this kind of dichotomy of humans versus machines and the ideal mix? Where do you think that is?
So I think big change is coming. I think AI removes layers of manual work, reporting, analysis, coordination, customer services, operational type roles. And actually many of the layers exist because they're compensating for poor processes, bad data, unclear decisions. And actually, I think AI brings all of that stuff to light. I think you're going to see much more smaller cross-functional teams rather than siloed, HR, finance, marketing, tech, because actually these teams are going to be solving problems, but the problems are aligned to products or moments or customer journeys, right? And I think roles will definitely become more hybrid, and therefore you need people with more sort of T-shaped careers. So, depth in some areas, but real breadth and that systems thinking, that critical thinking across piece. And I think, if you think about capability, I think job descriptions, CVs will be dead because AI can scale or shrink capacity instantly. So this is all around the kind of skills that people have to solve problems. So more project-based work, more talent marketplaces, more internal gig type economies. And I think, that skill for managers to manage a human and an AI or agentic workforce, I think are going to be really, really interesting because from a manager perspective, how do they train up an agent? Who's accountable? How do they work together between the agents, the humans, and the mix of all of that? How do they audit for outcomes to ensure there's no bias? Things like that. So I think we'll see a real flattening of the organizational structure such that instead of it being a traditional triangle shape, it will become much more diamond shaped. And I think as organizations get more mature in this, I think the bottom of that diamond will thin out even more over time. And you'll end up with this kind of inverted triangle where you've kind of got senior people at the top who are super smart, orchestrating a mixture of humans, but mostly AI for some of that low level work. So
Hmm.
I think big implications coming.
One of the implications for what you just said is, yes, you need senior, super smart people who have broad context, which frankly you get from life experience and organizational experience and zigzag careers, or I can't remember what you said about yours, but
Quickly
right.
careers, yeah.
I mean, I've had the same, right? So that means that you and I both have this kind of cross-functional experience. Now, the implication of that is, of course, talent pipeline,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
you don't just join an organization with 20 years of cross-functional experience straight from university. Maybe you join after having done a lot of jobs in different fields. How do we develop the pipeline of people that needs to come in and eventually be these super smart people who orchestrate the agentic workforce?
I think it's the biggest question that organizations all need to be thinking about, because I think you're right. The talent pipeline is going to be dead at this rate because you're already seeing entry level roles disappearing. So I think, for consulting type roles, I think there are different entry paths now. So when I, for example, joined PwC as a graduate, I spent a lot of time doing billing and completing tax returns. All of that will disappear. AI will do it. So I think there's a big piece around upskilling entry level roles faster to be client facing, to build that context, but using the AI tools to get them skilled up on researching a client super fast. So they don't necessarily have to, before they even meet a client, they should know about that client strategy, their competitors, the challenges that they've got, because they can gather that information through AI and research. I think the element of building skills on the job, I think that is going to be tough, because how do they collaborate? How do they talk to a client? How do they articulate their ideas? I think that is the real essence of what work is about currently, where you learn that through years, joining the dots on different types of skills and contexts. I think that is really, really challenging. An organization I was talking to the other week are implementing much closer kind of mentorship for their young people coming into their organizations to try and accelerate the way that they develop. They are bringing in much more rotational type work. So they're getting exposure to lots of different things faster. They are making sure that they are super well equipped from an AI perspective. So they've got the tools to hand to kind of accelerate and turbocharge the way that they do work. But I think there is a real challenge, and I think it's only with a test of time we're going to see how some of these experiments play out and whether people actually do develop the right capabilities in the right kind of timescales. I think it's really challenging, and I don't think there's a single answer. Actually, an accountancy firm or a consultancy firm was saying, rather than focusing on the kind of accountancy qualification or the you know a treasury type qualification, they're focusing more on kind of project management and kind of broader connector skills to kind of help get the work done, assuming that they will skill up on the job. I don't know. I mean, for an accountant to not have accountancy qualification, I think is quite challenging in my mind. So I think it's going to be a wait and see as to how some of these experiments play out.
Hmm. Again, I go back and forth on this, which is the notion of skills. If you take what you've broadly articulated, is we need people to do things. Those things can be done by machines. So now we need people to do the next level of things. But machines can do those things. So we need people to do the next level of things. And we get into this kind of circularity where we just keep going, well, why does a person need an accountancy degree or qualification when the basis of that is, can you understand the fundamental processes and ways of working of this particular professional discipline? All of which is basically written down in a book somewhere, or a series of books, or a series of protocols or standards, or whatever it is, which a machine can understand and agents can action. Right. So now we need the people to be able to structure work such that the agents can do it. And that's project management or orchestration or oversight. Right. But a machine can do that now. So we don't really need people to do that. Well, what do we need people to do? Well, rapidly understand context around a particular client, do the research, whatever it is, and be able to determine what the white space is that particular client needs and what the price point needs to be. That's rule-based and data-based scraping, which a machine can do. So we start to get into this kind of, and I would love to have the time at some point, maybe I'll do it over Christmas and the festive break, to just go into this and just keep going step by step so I can reach the nth conclusion of what it is that people actually will be doing in the new world. Because it seems to me that we are in this space now where every time we have a conversation, the skills that people need are actually diminishing in every conversation. So I think that's interesting. I'm not, as I say, I'm not the positive optimist that some other people are, but
Yeah. I mean, if I'm being blunt, the reason you need a person still in the loop is if something goes wrong, they are on the hook. So
it's a
from
blame
a,
thing. Yeah.
yeah, right. And I think that is very difficult, right? Because how are you going to, if you are on the hook and you are accountable, you need to take accountancy as an example, or a lawyer. Yes, you've got AI that can read a rule book and say, yes, you can do that or you can't do that, right? But you still need that judgment to tie some of that context all together. And yes, an agent can do it, but you still need to orchestrate that. You still need to apply the experience that you've had over many years, over different industries, over different contexts on that. And the AI can only be as good as the training that it's got. So if it has been trained on legislation, it's working in this theoretical bubble, right? And there are external shocks that will happen. There'll be internal shocks that will happen. There'll be conduct issues that happen. How does it deal, with those kind of shocks to the system? So I think, my point of view is we need to be super clear around what the work is and the outcomes we want to achieve, and what are the inputs going into that? Because I think a large part of those inputs, yes, can be AI'd, but what are the non-AIable parts of that? And I think there's something around deconstructing the work to understand specifically what can be automated, what is the AI going to augment, and what needs to be human centric. And then you can go into, well, what does that mean for roles and then skills? But my kind of base hypothesis, having worked, at Standard Chartered for 12 years, PwC before that, Kantar for 4 years, all of these organizations are built through legacy, and it's a real spaghetti in terms of the processes, the systems, the data. And I think it's quite messy to untangle all of that. And I think AI is going to expose all of that. So for me, the organizations that do really well will be the ones that understand their business really clearly, to be able to go through that structured thinking that you're talking about around what is the work left to be done by humans and where do they really add value. Because I think organizations need to be thinking about, to extract the most value, if I was AI native, what is the outcome we're trying to achieve and how would we do that? And not be blinded by this spaghetti over here that has built up over years and years of just, inefficiency and sticky plasters and bubblegum holding everything together.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I think I've experienced this and spoken about this, which is a business like mine, which has been around for 2-3 years, is an AI native business. I don't have legacy systems, legacy processes, legacy skills, legacy people to deal with.
Yeah.
And a big company is going to have to deal with that stuff if they want to get to the same position of AI agility that a younger business can have. So
But this
that's
is
going to
why
be
I think
tricky.
it's probably going to take time, because, I mean, companies are like still in that AI frenzy, a lot of them. And it's
Mm.
taking much longer than I thought for them to really work out how to find the value. So if you extrapolate that, I think there's quite a long journey to go on. But I think the winners who get their heads around this faster, they will be the ones that will become more competitive. And it's almost like, if you're a laggard in your world, you will stay a laggard. If you're at the top of your game, you will rise even quicker. And that applies at an individual, but also a team level and an organizational level. So my question is, how do you take agency to stay at the top of your game?
So with you saying that, my reflection on that is that most of the companies that I've witnessed working with AI and doing it badly, I get this question a lot, who am I seeing do this well? And I'm not going to answer that. I'm just going to point out the ones that are doing this badly, of course. But the ones that are doing it badly, in my opinion, are the ones where they have focused on people to the extent, and I don't mean the well-being of people or the emotional stability or the psychological safety or the change or the culture or any of this stuff. What I mean is, when implementing AI, they try and focus on how can we get some baseline of AI capability into the hands of every person in the organization. So they're focusing on people, licenses, headcount, that kind of approach. Let's implement Copilot and get everybody on board with this. Unfortunately, back to what I was saying, if you have a use case, you have a strategy, you have a way that you're going to restructure your organization, you're going to focus on value, you're going to build appropriate systems to generate that value, your people, effectively, that landscape is going to look different. And starting off on the premise that your people landscape is going to look the same before and after an AI transformation is a big error, I think. Do you think the same thing?
Well, look, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think, to find the value, I think that vertical AI adoption is key. So, applying AI to very specific use cases and working that through, that's what's going to get you value. But this is with a capitalist mindset. The reality of the world is, I think, companies have an obligation, even before they have an obligation. I think they should be helping people build broad AI literacy skills. Then if you
Why?
think,
So this
because
is
I think this is less about capitalism and more a moral, societal piece.
right. Yeah.
Where
Organization versus society.
regardless of whether that person stays employed by that company, everyone will need to have an awareness, if not more than an awareness, real ability to use AI going forward. And so, from that societal kind of moral perspective, I think organizations do need to do that horizontal AI upskilling, but recognize that there will be a dead cost to this at some point, right? But I think organizations need to, and actually, if you're thinking, with my DEI hat on, the people that you think are going to be critical to your organization in an AI native world, if you were to do a talent review of them now, I think by the time you upskill people and there's magic happening in people's minds, I think actually there will be talent coming through that's completely hidden, that will emerge because actually they've suddenly been engaged in a way where things are connecting in their brain and they are seeing the art of the possible in a much more visionary way than using AI to summarize your meeting notes in a call, right? And you want to give those people a chance because they are going to be brilliant for your organization.
Yeah. And I guess my reflection on that is that I worked somewhere, I can't remember which of my various jobs it's been, but they were doing one of these little evaluation pieces where you're blue, red, yellow, or green, right? Everyone's doing those things these days.
Insights, yeah.
And they were getting feedback. And the feedback that they were getting and somebody said this, somebody in the audience said this, basically, you get people into the organization from very different, diverse backgrounds, skill sets, etc. And then you put them through effectively, they didn't say this, but like a brainwashing exercise, that you must do things our way. And everything that you do in the company is going to be incentivized by your ability to do things our way, within our processes, within our systems, within the way we tell you to do it. So you get effectively a sausage machine effect where everybody might start off as different ingredients, but they come through and they're all sausages at the end. And that's exactly the thing we don't want if we want this diversity of talent to be able to push the agenda forward. So we need to think potentially about onboarding, selection, all of this stuff differently, which
And I
means
think you need visionary leaders who are thinking bigger than I'm just going to automate my data collection process to get my cash in sooner. You know, you need leaders to be doing a bit of that, but you need people to be thinking bigger, much bigger, as to kind of what the art of what you can do to completely revolutionize how you engage with customers, for example, and then drill that down into what that organization needs. And I think, you know, I hate the idea of companies pigeonholing people into this kind of sausage making machine, because I think you underestimate the potential of people. And I'm a big believer of, you know, people have the potential to do much more than you think they are. They just need the right conditions to really go after that. And some of it might be incentives, quite frankly, but some of it is the nurturing. And that's where, you know, my stance is actually the manager's role in cultivating that is really important. But you need smart managers. You know, you don't want the managers who just want to focus on process. You want them to be thinking much more in that systems view of, where is this team going to add value? What is the problem we're here to solve? How can some of this tooling help?
Is there such a thing as a smart manager?
Yeah, but this is again where my stance on this is organizations need to get much tighter around assessing their managers. And we did quite a bit of this in my previous role as well. But being really clear around, what does great look like as a manager? What are you going to be assessed on? Including in today's world, the AI adoption level in your team and how you are solving problems, how you are delivering work in a smart way. I think that's the way to drive that accountability and raise the bar on performance. And, you know, some of the data on AI usage is quite interesting, because there's studies showing when you look at AI used by low performers versus high performers, everyone improves, but the low performers improve the most proportionally. So they create the biggest delta in their performance. So we should be thinking about this as, how do you improve the bar on capability across the board?
Isn't that just a mathematical inevitability rather than a meaningful finding?
Maybe, but if I was a CEO of a company and I could improve the productivity that I could measure through my P&L by 1% across my whole company, I would be saying hell yes, because that is going to make a
Yeah.
material amount of difference.
No, but
Whereas
my point
at the
is, if
moment, your top 20% are driving 80% of the value. Imagine if you could have a bigger proportion of your organization driving that value. And it might be, to your point, that that portion is much smaller versus AI going forward, but you get more value out of your workforce broadly.
yeah, my point is slightly more that if I've got somebody who's performing at 5%, and after they use AI, their performance is 6%, that's a 20% increase. But it's only 1% in terms of numbers, right? Now, if I got somebody at 85% and they go to 86%, the delta is the same, but in terms of a percentage, it's different. So mathematical inevitability in how you present the numbers.
Yeah, but the study that was done shows that the bottom performer didn't just improve by 1%, they improved by like 40 something percent, whereas your top performer improved by 17%.
Yeah, so that would be 5% to 7%, which is still terrible. And I would still get rid of them if it was my organization, right? So anyway, maths topic for another day. So this has been a really interesting hour. I'd like to leave the conversation with a question. And that is, we've talked about the impact of AI on productivity, on organizations, on society, on the workforce, and how we think about skills and how we think about talent. And that leads us down an obvious kind of finishing question, which is the future of work. If we take a 5-year trajectory, what do you think the workplace of the future might look like?
I think the one word I like is sensing, and you're going to see more sensing from a skills perspective. So, you know, there will be, you know, at the moment, you look in Workday and you need to fill in your kind of your skills. No one does that. No one does that. You know, imagine a world where skills can be inferred through using AI, through how they're communicating with people, how they are doing their work through their, let's say, their Microsoft platform. You know, you're looking at, you know, their emails, their team chats, what they write on LinkedIn, what they're passionate about, and, write blogs on, things like that. And of course, you have to manage the privacy part of all of this. But wouldn't it be incredible for the machine to infer your skill base that you can check, but then it can be much more dynamic in finding problems that might match to your skill set? And so I think it could be a game changer in terms of matching skills and people to work. If you extend that to live culture mapping, engagement surveys, performance reviews, static dashboards, these once a year type activities, you could replace all of that by continuous sensing to give you this live culture map where you're getting this engagement sort of sentiment based on the tone, the energy, levels of psychological safety, which are really important across different communication channels, the way people are giving feedback. How do you use it to surface issues like trust gaps, micromanagement, who's delegating well, who's not? And again, you need to be careful about the privacy issues because this could move into very dangerous and unethical employee surveillance. But if you are thoughtful and transparent with what the data is being used, this could be really powerful at an employee level to drive their engagement and help them think about their future career, but also at that enterprise-wide level. So I think it could be quite exciting. And then I think, all of the use cases for AI for the power of good, around scientific research, curing horrible, horrible diseases, and medical research. I think it could be an absolute game changer to accelerate the research and the time from concept all the way through to actually producing a drug going forward. So I think it could help humanity and health going forward.
That sounds pretty far-reaching in terms of humanity in our society. I think my reflection on my question is a little bit more work-focused rather than society-focused.
Right, yeah, maybe.
I would like to see a future. Everybody who's watching this, make it happen. Do it for me, right? I would like to see a future where the concept of an enabling or supporting function does not exist. So you've got a company that does a thing, whatever that thing is, that's a value chain. You've got inputs, throughputs, outputs, revenue. And then you've got all of these tangential departments that just basically don't add value. It exists to control things around the environment, so regulatory or suppliers or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I'd like to see all of that gone. I'd like to see all of that done agentically. Yes, that means you learning departments and HR departments and talent and procurement and legal and finance and all of these other bits. I'd like to see all of that done in a way that is fully agentic, automated, compliant, multifunctional, cross-disciplinary, done from data without the need for superfluous effort. I think that would be amazing, but that unfortunately does mean that some people are going to have to find some purpose, some things.
You've been spending a lot of time thinking about this, clearly. Going to wipe out all these functions. I don't disagree. I think there is real possibility to do this. It will take time. And I think the reason it will take time is because our systems and our data and all of that stuff is so fragmented. But I definitely think over the next 5 years, there is a massive opportunity for all of these support functions to be a lot more strategic and a lot more enabling than they currently are.
Yeah. I agree. Right. It just remains after this riveting conversation where we've covered a lot, frankly. We have covered more than I expected in this hour and an hour and 15. So it remains, Tejal, for me to say thank you so much for being part of this conversation.
Brilliant.
Let us do this again soon. It's been too long. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're watching this on Spotify, don't forget to follow the channel. You can find Reels on Instagram, on TikTok, and on YouTube Shorts. And of course, follow both myself and Tejal on LinkedIn. See you next time.
Thanks, Ash. Bye.